I wiped the kitchen counter in silence, listening to my son complain about the breakfast I had just set on the table. It was a Tuesday morning, and the house smelled faintly of toasted bread and black tea. David poked at his bowl of oatmeal with a spoon, his expression caught somewhere between annoyance and exhaustion. Beside him sat his wife, Sarah, tapping aggressively on her phone while ignoring the food entirely. They had moved into my home 6 months ago, claiming they needed a temporary place to save money for a down payment on their own house. Instead, 2 new luxury SUVs had appeared in my driveway, and Amazon packages arrived daily with Sarah's name on them. Meanwhile, I continued paying the utility bills, buying the groceries, and quietly managing the household. "Mom, is this it?" David sighed, pushing the bowl away. "You have all day to do nothing. You could at least make a real breakfast. Sarah needs protein before she goes to the office." Sarah didn't even look up from her screen. "Oatmeal is basically peasant food, Bethany. It's full of empty carbs." "I can't eat this." I stopped wiping the counter. I didn't raise my voice, and I certainly didn't cry. At 65, I had lived through too much to let a spoiled 30-year-old dictate my worth in my own kitchen. I looked at the two of them perfectly comfortable in the space I had worked decades to maintain after my husband passed away. They had slowly taken over the living room, filled the garage with their boxes, and treated me like a live-in maid whose only purpose was to facilitate their lifestyle. "You want a real breakfast?" I stated, setting the dishcloth down by the sink. David nodded, completely missing the shift in my tone. "Exactly. Just put in a little effort, okay?" I looked at him for a long moment, memorizing the casual disrespect on his face. "Okay?" I replied softly. "Tomorrow will be different." I turned my back to them and started washing the dishes. I already knew exactly what I was going to do. I woke up at 5 the next morning. The house was completely silent, the kind of heavy, peaceful quiet that only exists before the rest of the world wakes up. I walked down to the kitchen and turned on the oven. If David wanted a feast, he was going to get one. But this breakfast wasn't for him. It was a celebration of my own quiet preparations over the last 30 days. I pulled out the cast iron skillet and started cooking. The rich smell of hickory-smoked bacon quickly filled the lower level of the house. I scrambled a dozen eggs with fresh spinach and cheese, flipped thick buttermilk pancakes on the griddle, and arranged a large platter of fresh fruit. I even brought out the good coffee, the expensive dark roast I usually saved for holidays, and let it brew. While I arranged the plates, I thought about the phone calls I had made over the past month. I thought about the quiet trips to the bank, the redirection of my mail to a private box, and the careful organization of my personal documents. I hadn't argued with David and Sarah when they disrespected me. Arguing was a waste of energy. I simply made decisions. At exactly 7:30, I heard the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway. I opened the back door before they could knock. My older brother Arthur stepped inside, bringing a gust of crisp morning air with him. Behind him was a woman named Helen, wearing a sharp gray blazer and carrying a leather folder. "Smells incredible in here." Bethany Arthur smiled, giving me a quick hug. "Everything is ready," I answered, motioning them toward the dining room. I set the table for 4 people, deliberately leaving only 2 empty chairs on the far side. Helen set her folder down on the polished wood. "I appreciate you doing this so early, Bethany. It's the best time to handle things," I said, pouring the coffee. Above our heads, the floorboards creaked. Heavy footsteps moved toward the stairs. My son was awake, drawn by the smell of the feast he demanded. David came down the stairs first, wearing his expensive silk robe and rubbing the sleep from his eyes. Sarah trailed closely behind him, her hair tied up in a messy knot. As they turned the corner into the kitchen, David stopped. His eyes widened as he took in the spread on the kitchen island, the towering stack of pancakes, the steaming eggs, the crisp bacon, and the fresh coffee. A broad, satisfied smile spread across his face. He puffed his chest out slightly, looking at me with a mix of triumph and condescension. "Well, look at this." David chuckled. "Looks like you finally know your place?" "I told you, Mom. A little effort goes a long way." This is exactly what we needed. Sarah peered over his shoulder, her usual scowl softening just a fraction at the sight of the food. "At least it's not oatmeal," she muttered, reaching out to grab a piece of bacon directly from the platter. "Take a plate, into the dining room." I instructed calmly, gesturing toward the open archway. David grabbed a plate, loading it up with food, completely oblivious to the atmosphere in the house. "See, Sarah? I told you, she just needed a push." He walked confidently into the dining room, ready to sit at the head of the table where his father used to sit. He froze. The plate in his hand tilted slightly, nearly spilling the eggs onto the rug. Sitting comfortably at the table were Arthur and Helen. Arthur took a slow sip of his coffee, not breaking eye contact with my son. Helen simply watched him with the detached professionalism of someone who had seen it all. Uncle Arthur David stammered, his confident smile vanishing instantly. He looked from Arthur to Helen, completely lost. "What? What's going on? Who is this?" I walked into the room, holding a fresh pitcher of orange juice, and set it down in the center of the table. I looked directly at my son. "Sit down, David. We have a few things to discuss before breakfast gets cold." David slowly lowered himself into one of the remaining chairs, holding his plate awkwardly. Sarah stepped into the room a moment later, stopping abruptly when she saw the strangers occupying the space she considered hers. She crossed her arms, her eyes darting between me and Helen. "Mom, seriously, what is this?" David asked, his voice losing its arrogant edge. Helen opened her leather folder and rested her hands on the table. "I'm Helen Vance. I buy residential properties." Sarah's posture stiffened. "Properties. Why is a property buyer in our dining room at 8 in the morning?" I pulled out my own chair and sat down, ignoring Sarah's tone. "Helen is here because she bought this house. We finalized the paperwork yesterday. She's here this morning to do the final walkthrough before taking official possession next Friday." The room went dead silent. David stared at me, his mouth slightly open, a piece of bacon halfway to his lips. Sarah dropped her arms, her face turning a deep, blotchy red. You sold the house." David finally choked out. "Without telling us, this is our home." "No, David." Arthur interjected smoothly, setting his mug down. "This is your mother's home. She just let you sleep here." Sarah stepped forward, her voice rising in pitch. "You can't do this. We don't have anywhere else to go. We are saving for a down payment. You've lived here entirely rent-free for 6 months." I stated, keeping my voice perfectly level. "You have no utility bills, no grocery bills, and no household expenses. In that time, you both bought brand new vehicles and financed a luxury vacation. Your budget is your responsibility, not mine." David looked panicked. "Mom, you can't just kick us out on the street. It takes weeks to find an apartment." I picked up my fork and cut a piece of my pancake. "You have 10 days. Helen takes the keys next Friday at noon. I suggest you start looking immediately." I took a bite of my food. It tasted excellent. David stood up his chair, scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. "This is ridiculous. You are being completely irrational because I made one comment about oatmeal." "It was never about the oatmeal, David," I replied, not looking up from my plate. "It's about the fact that you feel entitled to my time, my money, and my home." Sarah scoffed, shaking her head. "You're throwing your own family out over petty resentment. Fine, we'll leave. But don't expect us to help you pay for your move, and don't expect us to cover the joint credit card this month." I set my fork down and reached into my cardigan pocket. I pulled out my wallet, extracted the blue credit card with David's name on it, the one tied directly to my primary account, and placed it on the table. I picked up the heavy kitchen shears I had left near the fruit platter. With one sharp squeeze, I snapped the plastic in half. "You won't be covering it because the account was closed yesterday," I informed them. "I also removed both of your vehicles from my auto insurance policy. You'll need to secure your own coverage by the end of the business day today, or you'll be driving illegally." David's face drained of color. He reached for his phone instinctively, probably to check his banking app. "You can't just cut us off without warning." Sarah hissed, her hands trembling slightly. "We need that card for emergencies. A trip to a high-end salon is not an emergency, Sarah. Neither are the golf clubs David bought last week," I answered. I gathered my empty plate and stood up. "I've spent the last 6 months funding 2 adults who treat me like an inconvenience." That arrangement ended at midnight. Arthur stood up, adjusting his jacket. "I think the message is clear. Helen, would you like to start the walkthrough in the living room?" I walked into the kitchen, dropping the pieces of the credit card directly into the trash can. For the next 2 days, the atmosphere in the house was suffocatingly tense. David and Sarah treated me like a hostile stranger. They stopped speaking to me entirely, communicating only through loud sighs and slammed doors. It was a familiar tactic. Whenever David didn't get his way growing up, he employed the silent treatment, waiting for me to apologize, and offer a compromise. But I wasn't a young mother trying to manage a moody teenager anymore. I was a widow who had finally recognized the boundary line. They had crossed that line 3 months ago. That was when Sarah decided my presence in the master bedroom was impractical. She had reasoned that since they were a couple and working full-time, they needed the larger space and the ensuite bathroom. David had backed her up, framing it as a favor to me so I wouldn't have to clean such a large room. I had moved into the smaller guest room without a fight, believing it would keep the peace. But peace never came. Next, my gardening tools were thrown out to make room for Sarah's stationary bike in the garage. Then my designated shelf in the refrigerator was taken over by their expensive meal prep containers. I became a ghost in the house I had paid off with 30 years of hard work. Now I watched Sarah's passive-aggressive retaliation with mild amusement. On Wednesday morning, she left a massive basket of their dirty laundry sitting deliberately outside my bedroom door, blocking the hallway. In the past, I would have quietly carried it downstairs and washed it to avoid conflict. This time, I didn't hesitate. I opened my door, placed my foot firmly against the side of the plastic basket, and shoved it hard. It slid rapidly down the hardwood hallway, crashing directly into their bedroom door, spilling dirty socks and shirts across the floor. I locked my door behind me and went back to reading my book. By Thursday evening, the reality of their financial situation was beginning to set in. I was in my room, packing my favorite porcelain figurines into a padded box, when I heard David stomping up the stairs. He pounded on my door twice. "Mom, did you mess with the Wi-Fi? The router is gone and Sarah has a Zoom meeting in 20 minutes. I didn't open the door. I simply spoke clearly enough for him to hear through the wood. The internet account was in my name, David. I canceled the service this morning. I don't need it anymore." "Are you crazy?" he yelled, his voice cracking with genuine panic. "We need internet to work. Then you should contact a provider and set up a hotspot." I answered, sliding another figurine into the box. "Or go to a coffee shop." An hour later, I went downstairs to grab a bottle of water. Sarah was standing in the kitchen, staring into the open refrigerator with a look of pure shock. The shelves, usually overflowing with the groceries I bought every Sunday, were completely bare, except for a single bottle of ketchup and a jar of pickles. She spun around as I walked in. "Where is the food? Did you throw it away?" "I didn't buy any this week," I said, retrieving my water bottle from the door. "I purchased a small mini fridge for my bedroom to hold what I need until I leave." "You'll have to handle your own dinners." "We don't have grocery money right now." Sarah snapped, abandoning her usual condescension for desperation. David's paycheck doesn't clear until next week, and we had to pay cash for new car insurance. I unscrewed the cap of my water and took a sip. That sounds like a budgeting issue. There is a food pantry down on Elm Street if you are truly in a bind. I turned and walked back upstairs, leaving her staring at the empty shelves. The illusion of their affluent, independent lifestyle was entirely shattered. On Tuesday, 3 days before Helen was scheduled to take the keys, a large moving truck backed into the driveway. Arthur hopped out of the passenger side, accompanied by 3 sturdy movers. David and Sarah were sitting on the living room sofa, surrounded by a chaotic mess of half-filled garbage bags and loose clothing. They hadn't bought moving boxes because they hadn't realized how expensive packing materials actually were. They looked exhausted, their faces pale and stressed. I directed the movers immediately. Start with the guest bedroom, then take the dining table, the antique bookshelf, and the patio furniture. David watched in dismay as a mover picked up the television from the living room wall. "Wait, Mom, you're taking the TV. We bought that." I pulled a folded receipt from my pocket and held it out. "I bought this television 3 years ago. You bought the sound system underneath it. You are welcome to keep the speakers." He sank back into the sofa, defeated. Sarah glared at me, her arms crossed tightly. "You're really enjoying this, aren't you? Destroying your own son's life." I paused and looked at her. "No, Sarah. I'm not enjoying this at all. It's deeply disappointing to watch 2 capable adults act like helpless children. I am simply moving on with my life." I gestured to the sofa they were sitting on. "Excuse me. The movers need to wrap that couch. It's coming with me." Sarah's jaw dropped. She stood up abruptly, grabbing her purse, and stormed out the front door, letting it slam shut behind her. David slowly stood up from the couch. He looked around the rapidly emptying room, finally understanding that there was no safety net left. "Mom," he said softly, looking at the floor. "We applied for 3 apartments. They all denied us because our debt-to-income ratio is too high from the cars. We don't have anywhere to sleep on Friday. I suggest you start calling motels," I replied and walked out to the truck. Friday morning arrived with a clear, bright sky. The house was entirely empty of my belongings. My footsteps echoed lightly against the bare hardwood floors as I did one final walkthrough of the downstairs area. David and Sarah were hauling the last of their black garbage bags into the trunks of their SUVs. They looked completely disheveled. The luxury cars they had been so proud of now looked ridiculous, stuffed to the ceiling with loose shoes, wrinkled clothes, and random kitchen utensils they had scrambled to buy from a thrift store. Helen arrived at exactly 11:45, parking her sedan smoothly by the curb. She walked up the driveway with a bright smile, holding a large envelope. I met her on the front porch. Sarah was standing near her car, pretending not to watch us, while David leaned against his steering wheel, staring blankly ahead. "Everything is cleared out," I told Helen, handing her the heavy brass keys I had carried for over 30 years. "The water heater was serviced last month, and the manuals for the kitchen appliances are in the top drawer." "Perfect," Helen said, taking the keys. "It's been a pleasure doing business with you, Bethany. Have a safe drive to your new place." I turned toward the driveway. I didn't expect a dramatic goodbye, and I didn't want one. I walked over to David's window. He rolled it down slowly. Sarah walked over, forcing a strained, unnatural smile. "Bethany, we know things got a little tense, but we're family. Once we get settled in the motel, maybe we could come see your new place, just to visit." She didn't want to visit. She wanted to know my address so she could eventually ask for money. I looked at them both. "No, Sarah. I need a long period of quiet. I'll reach out when I'm ready." I didn't wait for her response. I walked to my own car, started the engine, and pulled out of the driveway without looking back in the rearview mirror. 2 weeks later, I sat at a small round table near the window of my new condominium. It was a modest two-bedroom unit on the ground floor of a quiet complex, fully paid for, with a portion of the cash from the house sale. The morning sun streamed through the glass, warming the surface of the wood and catching the steam rising from my teacup. There was no tension in the air. There were no heavy footsteps upstairs, no passive-aggressive sighs from the hallway, and no one demanding that I cater to their schedule. The space was entirely, unquestionably mine. My phone buzzed on this table. I glanced at the screen. It was a text message from David. "Mom, the motel is charging us double for the weekend rates. We barely have enough for gas to get to work. Can you please just wire us $500? I promise I'll pay you back on the first." I stared at the words for a moment. 6 months ago, I would have felt a sharp pang of guilt. I would have transferred the money, immediately convincing myself that it was a mother's duty to cushion her child's fall. But I knew better now. Sending the money wouldn't help him. It would only invite them back into my life under the same broken dynamic. He needed to learn how to stand on his own 2 feet, and he never would if I kept offering mine. I set the phone down without replying. I opened my settings and temporarily muted his notifications. I didn't need the disruption today. I picked up my teacup, took a slow, deliberate sip, and watched a cardinal land on the bird feeder I had installed outside my window. For the first time in years, I felt incredibly light. I had finally found my place, and no one was ever going to take it from me again.